Free. Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrew Irumba Kakisabe, your speaker, and this is the Pan-African Parliament Show. This is the People's Local Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament that sits here every Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. at Fairway Hotel. For you, those of you who are actually following us via our social media online, we are live at Fairway Hotel. This version runs here from 5 to 8 p.m. on Friday, and on Saturday the same recorded version runs on NBS TV from 4 to 5 p.m.
Globalization, if not taken care of very properly, it can actually, as Africans, we can be extinct with globalization. But if we use it, we can benefit from the byproducts of globalization. Otherwise, if it comes and we look on, it could be like tying your goat in the same crowd as the lion. The lion will beat you up. So that's globalization. We should also adopt the new methods of ensuring that we use the products or the byproducts of globalization so that we can benefit from it as Africa.
Globalization more or less started as internationalization. So there was internationalization, and in this internationalization that has now transformed into globalization, Africa has been left behind. This is a fact. The moderator was calling us goats. But it is not that all the time we were goats. There was a time when we were lions. We contributed to world civilization. So at some point then we became goats. It is now time to become lions and roar. How do we do it? We're supposed to do it? You. Mainly you, not me. And me, but mainly you. So I am facilitating the discussion today. So internationalization that marginalized Africa mainly begins with slave trade or slavery. Slave trade, you remember how Africans were sold like goats in the market? That was the beginning. Followed by colonization. That evil, that vice of colonization. And I can't believe but this one, I expect that you Pan-Africanists already know the challenges and issues of colonization. After liberation from colonialism, then there was indirect colonialism, which was neo-colonialism. The indirect domination, exploitation, marginalization of Africa indirectly, whether it was economic neo-colonialism, whether it was political neo-colonialism, military neo-colonialism, even biological neo-colonialism. Now, since the 1990s, we have this phenomenon called globalization, in which again, Africa has been left behind, marginalized. You can talk about trade. We can give a few examples. Today, as we talk, Africa's contribution to global trade is only 3%. You hear that? And yet Africa's population, the ratio of Africa in the globe is about 16%. So a population of 16% but contributes only 3%. 33 of the least developed countries, LDCs, are from Africa. 33 of the LDCs out of 46 LDCs in the world are in Africa. That's not a compliment to Africa. Africa is now the darkest continent. Remember when the Europeans came, they called us the dark continent, referring to our civilization, that we were not civilized. But the context in which I'm talking about the dark continent is not that of civilization. I am talking about power or electricity. When you fly over Africa, you see a dark continent. When you are flying over Africa and you again just enter Europe, you will see Europe is lighting, Africa is dark. We can talk about the issue of technology. How many patents does Africa register every year. And sometimes the patents registered by Africa in Africa are actually research done by Europeans or Westerners in Africa. Very little is done by Africans. We could go on and show this challenge of Africa. Poor governance is in Africa. Freedom index, Africa is the one which is high. Number of refugees, Africa has a number of refugees, and of course the Middle East. Africans were taken as slaves 400 years ago. Today they are taking themselves as to be in slavery. Today we are taking ourselves to be in slavery. When we is the African lion roar, and we want the African lion to roar. So, globalization of today, as the moderator had already pointed out, can refer to the intermingling or mixing of interconnectedness of the world. The world is now more interconnected than before. Interconnectedness of technology, interconnectedness of people, interconnectedness of goods, services, interconnectedness of capital, interconnectedness of values, interconnectedness of very many things. So Africa is more interconnected. It is now a global village. We are in a multicultural society, and there is interconnectedness even in consumption habits in the global world. What is it that has facilitated this? It is mainly technology, especially telecommunication technology, but also transport technology has made it easier for this interconnectedness to happen, and it is happening rapidly. But now what is our contribution to this global village? We are having a global village, but what is the Africa's contribution? Now, this interconnectedness has somehow left Africa behind. You can get as many facts and figures as possible. It is Africa which actually sometimes is not taken seriously. When our presidents are going to the UN meetings or other meetings in New York or Washington, they send not even ministers. In those days they call them secretaries. They send deputy secretaries to go and meet our presidents. But when the president from China or from Russia comes, they meet him. Actually, when he enters the hall, there is uproar that such a president has entered. But the African presidents, even if you combine them, of late you have had some hegemonic policy, international policy of summits. Have you had summits? Africa-Japan summit, all 54. They go to Japan.
So if you combine all of 54, they cannot raise an uproar.
That is the question. There you go. Then the Russian Africa summit.
I think you're being unfair.
America-Africa summit. It was there recently. I saw all of them going to America just to meet and take photographs with Biden. Which other Africa summit is going to take place? China, even Arab countries. You find the Africa summit, and it is Africans to go there. To me, I think the youth, as a social category, should realize its agency, its power agency, because you are educated, you are knowledgeable, you are networking, you are networked through the technology. You should harness your youthfulness, your agency, in order to liberate Africa, which we shall call maybe the second liberation. But to do that, you must identify your agenda and promoted. Let me go back to globalization and Pan-Africanism. I think Pan-Africanism, in my opinion, it is subject to debate, is misguided. Like I said earlier on, we have got stuck in 1963. There are external forces and external challenges of the African continent and African peoples. I agree. Don't mistake me to say they are not there. We have neoliberalism, we have the market ideology, we have global corporations, global institutions, we have global norms, we have global rules, we have global technology, all domineering us and Western value systems and Western capital. That one I agree. But unless we shift our paradigm, we have a paradigm shift from always blaming the external forces and leaving out the internal forces. I can assure you we shall remain where we are. There are internal forces in Africa that are holding Africa back. Division or fragmentation. Africa is fragmented. What do you expect from the regime that is in Khartoum, which came into power through a military coup? The one in Sudan, North Sudan, that came through a military coup. The one in Mali, the one that came with a military coup, through a military coup. The one in Burkina Faso, the one in other places who are stealing elections and coming into office using stolen elections. How do you expect such leaders to liberate Africa unless the youth take it up themselves and avoid, first of all, fragmentation and avoid authoritarianism? How do you expect authoritarian leaders to liberate Africa? How do you expect corrupt leaders to liberate Africa? How do you expect nepotism, people practicing patronage and nepotism and tribalism to liberate Africa?
Are those ones being practiced in Uganda?
I am talking about Africa.
Okay.
And Uganda is in Africa.
Okay.
So I don't know what you are talking about, but I know the whole of the African continent is partly lagging behind because of external forces, but also internal forces. He has gone, but I don't know how he was authorized as a dependency school. Dependency school is no longer tenable. Now let me ask this fundamental question. Was India colonized?
Yes.
And was it colonized more than Africa? Why is it among the BRICS? Have you heard of the BRICS?
Yes.
The new economic geography. Why is India, which was colonized, taking off? Was Singapore colonized? Was Malaysia colonized? Was Hong Kong colonized? Was Taiwan what even China? Was China colonized? Why do we remain in the ashes? You know, when you burn a house and you remain in the ashes without thinking about building the house, that happens, you never have a house on your head. That we were colonized 60 years, decades, six decades ago. We were colonized. Yes, we were colonized. And there is globalization.
Like any other countries.
Like those other Southeast Asian countries were colonized. Costa Rica was colonized. Brazil was colonized. Why do we have to remain talking about colonialism until the cows come back home?
But will they even come back home?
I don't know.
We still have the cows.
They are there.
There's a lot of raiding in Karamoja.
But the point I am making here is that there are both external forces that are in Africa behind and internal forces. And Pan-Africanism should fight external dominating forces as well as internal dominating forces. Patriarchy that is dominating our female gender. Nepotism is a cancer. You cannot have technological development because of nepotism and tribalism. The Southeast Asian countries, although they were authoritarian, they made it because they promoted meritocracy. That they had a civil service that was promoted on merit. They had a scientific, civil society, public service, civil servants that were promoted on merit. But if you are going to promote people,
meritocracy,
because they belong to your tribe, or your family, or your religion, or your obese, and you think you will fight globalization, we shall remain behind.
Is that not happening in Uganda?
All those I have talked about,
yes.
I have told you once again that Uganda is in Africa, and this is the African caste. The African caste is nepotism, is tribalism, is patriarchy, is corruption, is patronage. Unless we leave those ones behind, the other forces who are going to dominate us, because they want to dominate anyway. They will dominate us because we cannot have a technological base, a scientific base, when we are promoting people who are not up to the task. You just get somebody who got a pass. How will you encourage these students to perform very well in school and at universities? You do very well, you get a first class, you don't get a job. Somebody who runs around in one day and the bounder gets a job before you get it. How will you be encouraged? You also say, why do I read hard? After all, those who don't read hard are the ones who get good jobs and who get jobs fast. They go to revenue authority, they go to these other good places. Unless Africa runs away from patronage, from nepotism, from tribalism, from authoritarianism, the global forces will continue dominating us. Southeast Asia was colonized, but they have made it. The riots must grow up. They cannot continue with excuses and claiming that we are waiting for revolutionaries. Revolution has lost a label. Who is a revolutionary?
German barbarians, they were living in northern Europe, covering northern Europe. They called them,
there is a group of people called barbarians.
They were barbarians. They called them wild tribes. Or sometimes they are called the Vikings. The Vikings. They came. They found Europe also instituted on the basis of kinship groups like ours, lands. And before they conquered the Roman Empire, which was also run on the basis of kinship groups, it was promoted and sustained by the spirit of voluntarism. Because African culture, you find that you like to participate in the governance voluntarily. Like in Uganda, you find the Kabaka is popular because of the traditional belief. This is our thing. That's what was happening also in Europe. So before they could conquer the Roman Empire and spoil it, they introduced Christianity. Why is the counting of the years starting with 80 as if there was nothing like development and they got it before Christ? But why was Christ killed?
I don't know, he wasn't there.
He rebelled. Was he a Christian?
I am not sure, I don't know.
He was a Jew.
He rebelled.
He belonged to the Jewish culture where he was baptized. And because he was castigating and destroying the humanism of the traditional society that existed then he was tried and convicted by Annas and Caiaphas, who were high priests of the traditional
Professor, and now we are saying that Jesus was destroying humanism.
Humanism of the traditional society promoted by the spiritualism. You can take me anywhere.
Free your mind now.
It was spiritualism. What I was talking about. Spiritualism, which tells you that don't kill, don't rape, don't kill your brother, don't do this. If you do this, what you are experiencing is a taboo.
So is that what Jesus was destroying?
Yes.
Yet Jesus actually is promoting that.
Me, you read the Bible. I've been reading the Bible again. Tell me where they say Jesus was a moral preacher. Jesus, when you read the Bible very well, he's talking about the bad things to come when he is about to come back. Actually, was a prophet of doom. You read the Bible, it's there.
Yes.
Yes.
So Jesus is now a prophet of doom.
He was talking about the bad things that will come when he's about to come back, and these are the things which are happening now. These are the things that you will hear wars, you will hear strange things, and these are the things that shows that another human race. Anyway, let me try to come back to political globalization.
Because you have really taken us
globalization. What happened is that when Christianity was introduced, there was moral breakdown in the Roman Empire. That is when there was corruption. This is what he's talking about. And it is because of the corruption brought about by the introduction of Christianity. I have got the books. Christianity was promoted during the Dark Ages when the barbarians were in charge, when they had conquered the Roman Empire. That's when there was moral breakdown. And when there was moral breakdown, the barbarians took the advantage to conquer the Roman Empire. Now, when the barbarians came, they are the ones who wrote the law which we are following. This immoral law. Sorry. This immoral law. The barbarian codes were written during the time of the barbarians. The law we are following, which we use, you can swear before the Bible said, what I'm going to say is the truth. When you have stolen, were written during the barbarians. Now, when the barbarians conquered the Roman Empire, this is you trying to see what happened. They were very destructive. They destroyed houses, looted property, killed people they had robbed from them, and they were sadists. They adopted the most ruthless, sadistic, and inhuman tactics. For example, they would grab children from their mothers and screw them up, and then pierce them with their knives as they are running down. Or they will smash them against the walls and the brain will turn out. That is the violence which they planted according to Engels 1984. These books, I have the books, I've read them, I'm not getting them from my head. That is when barbarianism, those barbaric acts, they created an oppressive state. They planted what they call immoral trade. This trade where you use money to make more money is what they planted. Then the third one was Christianity and education. Now, with trade, they were planning expeditions, both at home. And that is when we got the second globalization, which they never talk about, which took place during the 16th century.
16th century.
That is when the Columbus, that is when there was slave trade, they came to Africa. That is when the Europeans played their barbarism in the whole world. In Africa, through slave trade. In America, by committing genocide, and near genocide in Latin America. And it was that time when the capitalism, as a system of where the majority of the people are impoverished by the capitalists, was planted in Europe. And the first victim of this barbarism were the Europeans themselves, I can say, because they were impoverished and made to live in appalling living conditions because they were displaced from their land grabbing which is taking place here. It first took place in Europe. And the people were impoverished and sent to live in squalid conditions of the slum.
Free your mind now.
The only solution is the globalization we're talking about. It was the first killing of the traditional society that impoverished the Europeans, that led to the genocide, was brought back under the neoliberal reform dubbed as globalization. Read Kenya, read Chamamacho, and others. The only solution, it is grounded within African culture. And I'm quoting Professor Kanyandako. Professor Kanyandako, he says, you do 3 ways. We should do away with the market economy, not money economy. Please listen to me. Not money economy, but market economy. There is a very big difference between money economy and market economy. Market economy is where you use money as a means of accumulating wealth as well as survival when you have been impoverished. A money economy is when you use money as a means of as a medium of exchange. That is, you buy things at par, so that the people should be involved in the production process. So we should go back to our own systems of committing a communal society where all the people are producers. Then when you stop with this system which promotes robustity, greed, which has brought these things you are talking about, then you will, that is the first step. The second step, dismantle the oppressive state. Dismantle the state. Thirdly, we should break away with these colonial masters who are imposing on us these unfair policies.
1986, Africa had the best opportunity. There was a leader who came to power, Ndebesa. I tell you, there was no better hope for Uganda and for Africa than that time. Actually, between 1986 and 1996, that decade when we were led by Ndebesa, the governance was real African.
And today?
Now,
Today is what?
after 1996, after 1996, something happened. Professor Ndebesa, if you remember very well. 1996 to 1996, we did not have elections. We were moving under the movement system.
Yes.
Which was a globalized system. It was not Western democracy, but it was globalized, I could say, between Western democracy and our OLC1 system.
In other words, it was a concept that works for Uganda.
Exactly. And I can assure you, then government is what was government. Now, all the problems that we are going through, if we went back to that period, I think they would be solved. That the 1986-1896 was a globalization. The type of democracy was different. It had an African element of the LC1 system.
An African context.
Yes, of the LC1 system. But now, I go to 2020, the later part of Museveni. It's a complete sellout.
Complete sellout.
Complete sellout because of globalization.
The bad word, Professor.
Complete sellout to African values. Because that's what globalization is. It is a question of bringing the culture and the politics of Europe to Africa. Not so? Now, when we talk of globalization, Professor Ndebesa has been very thorough. And just me, I want to go to his solutions. Because you've given me little time. The solutions. Number one, we have got to have African leaders.
That's what they want to hear.
African leaders who feel for Africa. Young people. President Museveni, when he goes out, is he not the leader?
Yes, he is.
Yes. President Museveni, when he goes out to look for investors, does he first sit with Africans and ask them which fields they are not able to invest in, so that he brings those who can invest in the fields Africans have failed? He does it. And when he brings the investors, why do you give them tax exemptions? If you bring an investor, you say, I'm giving you free land. I'm giving you tax holiday for 10 years. You not pay taxes. While Ugandan companies are paying taxes. Are those investors or plunderers? All African leaders now are businessmen and co-plunderers with the West. That's why you find a president like Ruto stopping impounding of milk, importation of milk. Why? He's a milk trader. He's a milk businessman. We need to get back to the African leaders. of the 60s who were not businessmen, who did no business. In the 16th century, Africa was plundered by the slave trade, but it was not without collaborators. There were African kings who were collaborators, and that's what made slave trade possible, not so? They collaborated with the Arabs and the traders from abroad to buy fellow Africans and then take them to slavery. Like Professor Ndebesa has said, even now we have Africans under developing Africa. And I take issues with my president. Recently, somebody wanted to get the list of companies that are not paying taxes. Which are these companies? Why do they come here? They don't pay taxes. And Ugandan companies are paying taxes. Do you then say you're a president for Africa and for Uganda? You are not.
Well, how will we get the globalization when we are in such a state of leaders who still think that sending of human beings to Arab world to do labor is globalization because they get taxed from them? Not knowing that these young people who go to these countries, they have mindset to change their country if they are given opportunity. Right now, universities have led out a lot of young people to go, they have given them degrees and whatever, with white young people getting masters. This means that these young people have knowledge to change. You can approve that, Professor. In your class and your classes, you've seen a lot of young people performing very well in your class, and you give them applause. But this government, or these governments in Africa, are not giving the space and virtue to these young people with good knowledge to act and do something that is of use to their countries. Some speakers spoke about social movement. I want to introduce to you National Front for Reconciliation, NFR, where I belong to be the director. This is a front for reconciliation brought by young people so that they can reconcile with the older people who have knowledge, not the foolish leaders. The people like Professor William, the people like you who can guide us and tell us this is how you should move. So back to the point. In this poor government, recruitment of people of concern, I would believe that people who recruit or people who advise the president of Uganda, for example, on appointing people in influential positions, I believe one person should be here listening to the young mindset, because we have a few places in this country that do what you're doing. If I may say, this is the only place that gives space to young people to speak their mindset out and speak what they think is true. But we don't have any government person who have ever came to you that I want to be in that sitting to see how we can recruit young people into influential positions. But these people sit in their bedrooms and make phone calls. My child failed, but I want you to give him to be the director in such and such a ministry. And the son will be given the position. A person who failed math will be given into a ministry that is concerned with math. This is the kind of leadership we have. As I wind up, we have to talk to these leaders so that they can put young people who have fresh mindset, who have fresh solutions to fresh problems. But you can't tell me a person of 1900 who was there in the days of slavery can know the solutions of the Google or .com era, which was formed in the 4th generation, 3rd generation of internet. We need to be put in two positions of influential as young people, because we are many, we understand ourselves, we understand our problems very well, and we can act accordingly because we are wise. What we need is guidance of people like Professor William, like Professor Ndebesa, like you, our Speaker, Honorable Irumba. We need guidance, but we don't need you to sit on our talents. I saw a young person in Boeing. He was a young person from Africa. He knew how to operate the engines of Boeing. But he was sold out to the Western country to improve their globalization while they are teaching us when they come on TV stations the history.
You see, his conclusion is what impressed me the most, that if we want as Pan-Africanists to attempt to solve the problem of Africa, let's begin by defining the kind of Pan-African we want to, the approach. You hear the lamentation of the youth. See, I've always asked that if you want to claim your space basing on the number, not your capacity, but basing on your mathematical numbers, but you want to tell the old people that please recognize us in that constitution that we all swear to protect, say, gives affirmative action 75%. Affirmative action in Uganda, I am a Japadola, the Luo speaker, but affirmative action in Uganda, those who are given affirmative action are called Bakateyamba, isn't it? Those who cannot help themselves.
The less privileged, the weak ones.
You cannot help yourself.
The weak ones.
You can't help yourself. Now,
yes, Professor.
Because leadership is what determines the mentality, the thinking, the approach, the engagement of how the people conduct themselves.
Even the development.
Exactly, the trajectory of development. Let me ask you, when you bring professors and very learned professors, and they are talking about the Vikings and so on and so forth, but you see, where you come from, it is no longer, I don't know whether people recognize this, that now this region, this Uganda, according to those who study history, tell us that it is a negotiated country. About that, 14 nations sat and negotiated this country. And those nations are also named. They have their local names and they have their known. Nyoro and so on and so forth. Today, you have a government, which is your African government, where this man comes from used to be called Toro or Nyoro and so on, now it is called Albertine. Now, how do you relate with Albert? Who is Albert? What is your spiritual attachment to Albert? Where in Bugisu they no longer want to call that nation Bugisu, they call it Elgon. Who is Elgon? When you go to test around there, they no longer call it Teso, they call it Savannah. Then what is Savannah? What is it? Because in the African sense, names are actually spiritual codes. Names are spiritual codes. So your attachment to your spiritual code or to the place where you come from, because you who come from Bunyoro and Toro, those are spiritual codes.
In Uganda, they don't call it Uganda.
In Uganda, they call it Central.
Who is Central?
Who is Central?
Professor Rejo, those are very important questions, Professor Rejo. I know how you research.
See, when you
why are they raising those?
And all the 15, all the 14 regions or nations.
Why is it called West Nile?
West Nile.
Why is it West Nile?
It's also West Nile.
Because those are questions. If we want to Africanize our ways and also be Pan-Africans or be Africans, those are questions that are fundamental.
Okay, finally.
Yes, finally. I want people to begin talking about things that matter. You know, as young people, because the majority of people here are young, Lenyo and so on, we are talking about the corruption and so on, and the gods, and the professor is telling us to begin talking about the Mabati and the gods and so on. Let me tell you, this man comes from an area which is a belt which has a lot of oil. You know that according to our information that we have here, Professor, they say we've started. Is it the oil is yet to start? The crude oil.
2025.
Yes.
Is when it will.
But the information from export.com, for example, that captures the entire of export of all countries. You know, Uganda is country number 122 in exporting crude oil.
Are you sure?
It is. In Google, you have that.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
we have not started exporting.
Google
We are
is
still
still
drilling.
have the machine. We can Google. You know, these days information is everywhere.
By 2025, that is when you'll be able.
No, but according to that, we started, according to World Export.com, we started exporting crude oil in 2018.
Our leaders are saying we are still drilling.
Yes.
We are still, in infrastructure development. We are constructing.
So I want people. So now, when we are telling you about
where is this information?
export.com,
you're a politician also.
Yeah, but I'm giving you reference. Let me tell you. Gold, according to, there is a report by Global Financial Times that made an investigation about the gold in Uganda, for example. They are saying in 2020 alone, the Ugandan gold export was up to 13.8 trillion. But you have a budget in your own budget. This is including this year's budget framework. It's actually being corrected now. Our budget framework does not capture any revenue from gold. So who takes 13 plus? Because it does not reflect in your budget. Now, 13 point plus out of your gold, the available statistics that your revenue from gold is 13.7 trillion, but it does not reflect in the income side of your national budget. In other words, it is somebody's private income. And nobody is talking about those things. I hope that's when you're talking about our budget, which is now around up to about almost 50 trillion, isn't it? But you see, William was talking about tax waivers and so on. Tax waivers alone in this country, these ones you bring these investors from Italy and so on, these ones, penalties and so on, it accounts to 9 trillion. You get it? You're donating another 9 trillion. 9 trillion tax waivers. Somebody is stealing your gold. I come from a place called Toronto, which has a gold deposit around Kira. According to government's own source. And if you think you want to find out, go and find new video of last year. On October 11th.
You're pushing me so far so that I don't get it.
Yes. Yes. Go and get it. It says the gold from that area alone, every day they will be getting a ton of gold. A ton of gold is $55 million. Every day. It is here in Toronto.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr.
Now, what I'm bringing this, Mr. Iruba, is that I want, when we are engaging in this kind of things, first of all, we should know that our engagement, no leader should lie to you that is engaging with a white man on account of money. In other words, what we have here can sustain us. The problem, we are not poor, it's because we are poorly governed.
Thank you so much.
So we have to ask ourselves, what's the position of Africa in the global village? Where do we belong in this global village as Africans? We see in the name of globalization, Europeans have instructed us to open our markets. But where is the equality? Where is the economic equality? Because we see today, did you know that the Ugandan currency, the Ugandan shilling, is backed by gold? The Ugandan shilling is backed by gold. And what is it all about? Sorry, it is backed by the US dollar, not by gold. And what's it all about the dollar? The dollar is produced by the reserve banks, by the Federal Reserve of the United States. And the dollar is backed by nothing. It is backed by trust and legal tender, plus the United States Army. That's what backs the dollar. In other words, the dollar is just a piece of paper, which the United States and the individuals in their government print at any time they want. And for us, our currency now is backed by that piece of paper. For them, anything they want, they print. They come and buy. minerals from us and cause inflation. Have you seen? And we study economics. We have students who are doing economics at Makerere and other universities, but you are not taught that. That means we need economic equality. Do you think why was Muammar Gaddafi eliminated? He was opposing the dollar. He was bringing in the gold dinar, which was to replace the dollar in the African market. So that's why I encourage you Africans, you us as Africans, to grow our own food. Because we have a saying that a man who grows his own food is like one who prints his own money. When we are planting our own food, when we grow our own food, it's like we are printing our own money, because we are not going to need the dollar. Another thing that I want to talk about, equality in terms of security. Here we talk about the Security Council. What is equality in terms of security in the global village? You see that in the Security Council we have I think 5 countries which have veto power in life. There are 5 countries. Africa doesn't have any permanent member of the UN Security Council. So that means when we talk about the global village, us as Africans shall remain suppressed. We shall have nowhere how we can express ourselves. When we come back to economics, we see African countries are being enslaved with debts. Mr. Speaker, Uganda's debt as per today stands at 80 trillion Uganda shillings. The public debt stands at 80 trillion Uganda shillings. So you ask yourselves, how are we going to pay that? That means that debt, and it's still accumulating, it will be even paid by the future generations. So that means us as Africans, as youths, really we have to wake up and find a solution. So Mr. Speaker, you also have to understand that in this global village we have winners and losers. So what is this? Where do we stand as Africans? Are we going to be winners or losers? So that's the question that I leave to you people. So, Mr. Speaker, what's the way forward? The way forward as Africans, we need proactive leaders, not proreactive leaders. Proactive leaders, leaders who are march into action. Not leaders who are always reacting, who are always, like we see most of our leaders today, before even they do something, they have to make it public one. But leaders who were proactive, like Muammar Gaddafi, they are different, prepared, called to make the African currency before even talked about it. But we have a problem with our today's leaders.
As the professor said, we can't have unity when we ourselves, Africans, we are fighting each other. Let's take a look at if Kenya itself, it stopped Ugandan milk from entering Kenya. How can we put localization into process if the leaders, African leaders themselves, they are fighting each other? Now what if, let's take a look, what if also our president says, okay, we're also stopping some things which are coming from Kenya, from coming in Uganda. Here we see in 1960s, Tendo during the Cold War. It brought about our the economies in Africa were reduced and they went down because of fake issues. Like we are trying to copy a lot of Western cultures. We African leaders, not only the African leaders, we the African youth ourselves. We are not doing anything, we are not taking part in fighting against the impacts, negative impacts, most especially the negative impacts about globalization. Because if Africans, we knew the negative impacts of globalization, we could take it as a serious note and only focus about the major causes. What is causing this unity in Africa? What is what's really causing it, that disunity in Africa?
Globalization. It's economism again in Africa. Because you see, it's attached to World Economic Forum. These people, the globalists, they must sit, I think it's in these labs. It's called Davos every year. They said for Africa. African countries or leaders are never invited. Look at the G20. It was in India. The other year it was in Tunisia. Africans were not invited. They sit there and check for that. This is a joke. I don't think we are seeing mostly the aid they bring us here, the aid. We've never seen any country that has developed because of aid. Because if you're given aid, they'll dictate the terms. And if they take the terms to mean to be applied, you cannot do anything. That's why African leaders, I'm talking about like Gaddafi, was killed because he was trying to liberate Africa economically and politically. They cannot leave you to liberate Africa unless Africans are united and we fight, we stand tall, we fight in the common cause. Because really, we are saying we have leaders, we are implementing, we have bad leadership, democracy. I've never been a believer of democracy. It's all a hoax. Because the moment someone comes, Mugabe was a very good leader because he hated most of the oppressed, but he was economic terrorism. We have seen Cuba, economic embargo was still there for almost 60 years. So what do you want Africa or this, what we call the global south and global north? There's global north, what's the global south? What shall we do? They sit and dictate the terms. We have leaders, strong leaders, by the good leaders, but because of what they said for us, the first of all they fear economic embargoes, sanctions. They will sanction you. What do you do? If you're not, like, don't stand together, have a common voice.
First and foremost, appreciate the role globalization has played in Africa. Yes, to a larger extent, it has had negative effects. But now, let's first appreciate it from a scholarly, pedagogical perspective as Pan-Africanists. We need not to approach the issue of globalization from a parochial perspective. I do believe that if we are to appreciate our history, we see how Africa has been channeled with the global south, actually, with the rest of the world, how they've been involved in meddling our political, economic, and social conditions to influence them to a certain way, that we've reached a level whereby we have a very inflated inferiority complex. Our leaders, whenever they go for the summits there, you really see how they sideline them to the side, because we cannot do anything. Why? Because this has been engineered from the times of the post-colonial days. We see how these foreign powers were involved in meddling in the political environments of African countries. We saw what happened in the Congo crisis, how to a larger extent, even here in Uganda, during Obote too, we see the role that was played by North Korea in fighting the guerrillas, and we saw so many atrocities being committed. And why do these atrocities get committed and they never gain world attention? It's because that through globalization, there has been being in charge of the media. They control what we see, and they develop a certain narrative for our history. We've seen how our leaders have been demonized. They've propagated certain propaganda to hoodwink our people. It is through this mass media, the media itself, Hollywood, the movies they are going to play for us, the music that we listen to, all that is globalization. And why do they keep disseminating this in the African masses? To keep us below the ground. And of course, as Pan-Africanists, it's not up to us to just come and lament here. We need to come up with practical solutions. Like I've said before, we need to appreciate the role globalization has played in our African countries. When it comes to data and information is knowledge. Now we've seen the evolution of artificial intelligence. We need to utilize such opportunities that come with globalization to better ourselves. And I so believe that we really do have the capacity to get the positive results that come with globalization, and fight imperialism, like my comrade there said. Imperialism, neo-colonialism, and globalization are all one. Just like Dr. Walter Rodney wrote in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So we really need to appreciate globalization, but also learn how to tackle the negative implications that come with globalization.
As I told you earlier, that globalization, if not taken care of very properly, it can actually, as Africans, we can be extinct with globalization. But if we use it properly, like Professor Ndebesa has actually put it very well, we can benefit from the byproducts of globalization. Otherwise, if it comes and we look on, it could be like tying your goat in the same ground as a lion. The lion will eat you. So that's globalization. We should also adopt the new methods of ensuring that we use the products, or the byproducts of globalization, so that we can benefit from it as Africa.